And now we have our next item, which we have some closed sessions at 2 o'clock, so we're going to jump over those. What we have is item G1, which is a presentation on a full-day tour of the Nordic Aquafarms facility in Denmark. Supervisor Arroyo.
Great. Well, I had the opportunity while on a personal vacation to tour the Nordic Aquafarms facilities that they have out in far northwestern Denmark. So this came about, before we pull up my slides and go through some photos and some information about the facility, this came about because as a new supervisor, Nordic Aquafarms reached out and said, hey, we'd like to, just have a chance to tell you about what we're up to and, meet and get to know you. And in that conversation, they mentioned that they had a fully operational onshore fish farming operation in Hanstholm, Denmark. And I said, I'm flying in and out of Copenhagen on a personal vacation. Is there any chance that if I can make it work in my schedule that I can come out there to see the facility? And they said, well, gosh, of course. So it was not a proposal by the company that I come and visit. It was rather that I was able to make it work, and I thought it would be really informative, and it was. So, Nikki, are you able to pull up my slides? Thank you so much.
Nice, there we go.
Okay, so they didn't sponsor my trip. I asked for it and went on my own dime. So we can go ahead with the next slide. So I'll walk you through a few things about the facility. I know there were a lot of questions that people in my, in my district really posed in advance of this. People that I know who reached out to and said, hey, if you could learn anything about this facility, what would you want to know? So I tried to pay special attention to those things. And so I'll touch on those as I go. So this is in Hanstholm, Denmark, which is about 7 hours from Copenhagen. So it's Denmark's a very small country, but and I thought, it's in Denmark, it'll be really close. But I ended up having to take, because it was a pretty full day, I ended up spending the night nearby and then driving back the next day. So it was about as far as you can get from Copenhagen. So this is on the, they call it Skagerrak, the part of the Pacific, or the Atlantic Ocean, that's between Denmark and Norway, has its own name. So Skagerrak Sea is what you're seeing in this picture here. But it is essentially the North Atlantic. And there's an ocean water intake and outfall for the facility that is pictured here. So they acquire all public power. So locally, there's only publicly owned and operated power generation facilities. A lot of it is wind, but not all of it. There are windmills absolutely everywhere. So there are turbines both on land and sea all over the country. And the land is leased from the local harbor authority. So there are a lot of similarities to the proposed operation here in Humboldt. The land's leased long-term from the harbor authority. It's a highly regulated coastal area. So Denmark has extremely stringent coastal regulations, as does the European Union, of which they're a member state. And then it's really close to one of the largest landing ports for marine fisheries in the area. So the Port of Hanstholm is by ex-vessel value, so the value of the product that's offloaded, one of the highest production ports in Northern Europe. And it is also a very popular surf spot. You can't see the waves in this picture, but there were some. The surf there is obviously a little different than it is here, but they call it Cold Hawaii, which I thought was cute because it doesn't look like Hawaii at all. But there's apparently great surf, and so immediately outside in the middle picture, you can see that to the left, you can kind of see the dunes. That's actually where people park to surf, so right across the street from the facility. So this is Sashimi Royal, which is their yellowtail kingfish operation. So in the larger picture, the building that you can see kind of in the middle, it's a shorter building, is the facility that's been in place since 2015 that does the kingfish grow out. The building closest to the picture taker, the one on the far left that's larger, is their new juvenile building that is being built out for juvenile rearing. And then the other dark blue gray building at lower right is the water quality filtration. And other buildings nearby are unrelated facilities. So we can go to the next slide, thank you. All right, so this is inside the adult kingfish grow out facility. So there is one large tank with 2 age classes of fish that are separated into 2 like raceways that are nested one within another. So they're like 2 concentric circles. And there are some challenges with that for them. They can never fully drain the tank because they always have fish at different ages coming in and out of the tanks. So future facilities would be designed differently, but this was, again, designed in 2015 and built. They did get some grant funding from the European Union Environment Program and other sources to start the facility, because aquaculture is something that's really being spurred on by government investment there. But the water is heated in this facility. Kingfish and I think any species that they could potentially grow would need the water to be heated because it's quite cold coming directly from the ocean. And then the center of the facility, so the bottom picture shows a bunch of black piping and stuff. I realize folks watching this can't really know what that is. So it's both the heating and the piping that goes to the bioremediation tank that's underneath that central kind of circle. And that has essentially like oddly shaped pieces of plastic covered in bacteria that help eat the fish poop, to put it in non-technical terms. And so there's catwalks around the facility. I wasn't able to be in there for a really long time because the fish get startled a little bit easily, and they don't really want there to be a lot of movement or talking in there. So we walked around fairly quickly, looked at some things, and then spent most of our tour outside of this facility. So this new juvenile rearing expansion that's happening is the building next door. So they're really producing a lot at their hatchery and are limited for space and therefore limited as far as their production because of this kind of juvenile rearing period that they need to accommodate. So these are going to be young fish. I'm not sure exactly how old, but in that kind of like middle range. This will allow them to be transferred over to the adult rearing and grow out facility more easily. And they're literally just piped in a tube. They're either trucked and sent through a tube to these tanks or piped between the 2 facilities. And they can conserve energy moving fish that way. And I just wanted to show this to kind of really indicate how much investment they're making in that facility. I know one of the questions that residents of our county asked was around the capacity of the company, because there had been some changes in the management, and there were questions about whether they were able to invest. And so I don't know what this all means for our community, but I know that they're investing really heavily in this facility. Okay, so a little bit about water treatment processes. That's not an exciting thing to take photos of, but nonetheless, the water bodies that they're both taking water from and delivering treated effluent to are natural bodies of water. So the ocean, and the top picture there is a fjord. It's not deep like the fjords I think of further north, but that is a fjord, so it's just a little inlet of water. And on the left, you can see this giant ozonator that ozonates the water at 2 different stages in the process. And then the bottom right is just some of the settling tanks and the bioremediation tanks for their new facility. So they're quite large. And there are 6 or 7 stages in the water treatment process that I was particularly interested in because water quality is such a big concern for all of us. Okay, so there's a hatchery and broodstock facility. So this is where water quality testing and invertebrate monitoring, which little invertebrates are what feed the fish. This is where all of that happens. So they're also employing a number of scientists to do that kind of work. And you can see in the picture at the top, the photo, almost like painting-like framing of the fjord that the water goes into and comes from. And I think that's all I wanted to say about this picture. All right, so the hatchery facility, this has been in place for more than 30 years. It was used for turbot, which is like similar to halibut, flatfish, and some other fish over the years, and it was repurposed for kingfish, so this is not a purpose-built facility like the other ones are, but it has been used for hatchery operations for the last 8 or 9 years by them. There are outdoor settling tanks, and so one of the questions that folks also had was about the smell of some of these facilities, and I will say that the only place that there was a little bit of notable funk was these outdoor settling tanks. They're quite far from any neighborhoods though, and it was only really standing that close to the tank that you could smell it. So the smell was really minimal. Standing inside and also being outside of that other building that we looked at where the adult kingfish are grown to scale, it smelled like a freshwater aquarium. Like you could kind of smell that like almost fish food smell, but it was so faint, even inside the facility. I'm really sensitive to smell, so I thought it was interesting that they've managed smell pretty effectively. And then this also houses their broodstock program. I think the next slide has a few pictures of that. So the goal is to rear healthy fish that are bred in captivity. So these are really fish that are being bred to be grown out for food. So they're not, impacting wild stocks of this species. So bringing in, at some point the fish are wild, but these fish here are several generations away from the wild fish. And so they're selecting the healthiest fish to gather fertilized eggs from and rear them in the hatchery. And then I met some of the people behind the operation. I know another question residents had locally was, how do people feel about it in their communities? Frankly, because I tagged this on to an already existing vacation and took 2 full days for the travel and the tour, I didn't have time to also go into neighborhoods and just sit down with people and ask them what they thought of the facility. I did go to a local restaurant where they served the product that is grown there, so it's right in that same town, and had a chance to eat the kingfish, which is on the right side of this picture. And that's not a beer, not that it really matters, but that's a candle. Anyone's wondering. So the kingfish in the picture is sashimi, so it's eaten raw. I had a chance to try it, and it was very tasty. It's really popular in the sushi industry, and the fish that's produced at that facility is sold to restaurant suppliers, so it goes directly to restaurant suppliers and then to restaurants. So it's not sold to local residents. So I didn't have a chance to ask local residents what they thought about it. I will say that aquaculture is extremely common in Northern Europe. It's just there are many, many, many aquaculture facilities, so it's just more culturally, I think, accepted and part of the culture. This is still a little different from most of their aquaculture facilities. Just traveling around, we saw a lot of pens, so netted areas, enclosures where fish are being raised in fjords or bays. So this is still a little bit unusual there to have the land-based industry. So we did get a chance to meet a few of the people involved in the operation. So Søren Madison is the CEO of Sashimi Royal, so heads that operation right in Hanstholm. And then Yasser Zahedi, the hatchery manager for the hatchery side of things and the broodstock operation. He had an interesting history, having come from doing sturgeon work in the Middle East. So he has a lot of experience with different kinds of fish. So the folks I spoke to, I was also curious, what their thoughts were just generally working for the company. They seemed very happy. Of course, I expect that they would say that to me, but it still seemed very earnest. And it seems like they also get what they need from the company when it comes to investment in operations. So one example was that they had, when they first opened their kingfish grow out facility 2015, 2016, they had water quality issues, and they had to redesign the facility and invest significant resources to meet their water quality testing parameters. So they were able to completely redesign the facility. So the water quality involves going through this bioremediation, like settling tanks where all the particulate matter settles out, then going through filters, going to these bioremediation tanks where bacteria eat the bad stuff, then going through the ozonator and UV light, so killing viruses and ozonating the water, and then it goes back through that whole cycle again. So I found that particularly interesting, and now they seem to have a good relationship with their regulators and are able to meet those water quality parameters. But they did have a point where they were not meeting them, and then they had to retool the facility. So that was important to me, thinking about whatever our future is with Nordic Aquafarms, to know that as a company they were able to invest the money to meet that higher and stricter level of regulation. So I think that is my last slide. The only other thing I wanted to, really highlight is, again, this was on my own dime, and I am not aiming to provide this information to necessarily promote this operation, but I thought it would be really helpful to understand more about what this really looks like on the ground, how much footprint it takes up, what types of facilities these are, how they're staffed, and just generally get a sense of how clean and functional the operations were. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have about it.
Thank you, Supervisor Arroyo, and appreciate you taking the time on your vacation to bring back this interesting information for us. Any questions, comments from the board? Supervisor Wilson? Nope, sorry.
I appreciate this. I want to say that going out of town does offer us opportunities to visit places we wouldn't ordinarily see, and that have tangents or connectivity to where we are. I want to say that I think that I appreciate the nerdy side trips on my vacations. I want to say that when I was Harbor District Commissioner, I did visit virtually every port in California and ports everywhere I would go, much to the chagrin of some of my family members. But I found it super fascinating and very interesting to see how small and large ports operate. And I was always amazed at how folks in those facilities were happy to have visitors of interest. And I will say many of those places did have aquaculture facilities, and in Hawaii there is there is an energy lab, federal energy lab, that has like almost 500 acres of aquaculture associated with it, and is a great tourist place to go to on the Big Island. So I just want to say, I don't find it unusual at all to visit these locations. And I appreciate these photos, and it's good for us to get some perspective sometimes about where the rest of the world is on some of these issues. I was in Chile this winter for a little bit, and yeah, the offshore aquaculture in the pens is everywhere in that space. It is really amazing to see that, but also to remember that so much of the aquaculture or the farmed fish, which is most of the fish we actually get imported here into the United States, has effluents that are completely untreated and are directly input into the environment. And so it's interesting to see how much effort goes into these facilities and the energy it requires and the treatment it requires to meet those standards for effluent standards, and the challenge around that. So that's all. I appreciate the report.
Thank you, Supervisor Wilson. Supervisor Bone?
We used to, years ago, I don't think anybody here remembers, we used to do our vacation photos every week and tell what we used to do. But no, thanks for doing that. I was wondering, have they started, I know Denmark has been a big push, I was reading, they're doing a big push to put the energy effects of their farmed fish on the labels. They're actually going to be the first country, and I know it's really got, because I know that this fish plant is a huge, but went right in the middle of climate change and everything else. It's a huge energy user, and I was wondering if they had started that yet, and how much. I know Nordic has got so many different arms to, you know, and I was wondering if they talked about. I know one time they came out with a quote that says they're going to build the Humboldt plant after they build the main plant. It was, I think, was said, and I know much to I'll applaud our planning and building. They were trying to get everything permitted so they'd build here first, and I don't know if we're being successful or anything like that. So, did they mention that? What their time? I'm sure they mentioned it. I didn't know if they told you couldn't say or whatever. But do they plan on building in the next 6 or 8 years here? Or?
Good questions. So the person I met with was really the CEO of that operation. And so while he had, you know, he said he attends and observes, you know, the board meetings and kind of tracks that. He said there was one coming up that I think was actually last week. So I need to dig into what happened in that meeting that I think was going to outline some of the plans of the company in a broader way. And, you know, he anticipated potentially coming to Humboldt at some time in the future to help advise or make recommendations about the facility and, you know, incorporate lessons learned, you know, if and when they are able to proceed. But he didn't say exactly what the timing would be or any of that. He just said, I really hope to, you know, be able to visit Humboldt. And I said, you know, we'd be glad to show you around and kind of, you know, warmly welcome you and show you what our facility, you know, our area has to offer. So they were very interested in, and everybody knew that there was an ocean outfall here that was quite different from what they had there. So every other facility, I believe, is working with like a near shore or immediately, you know, right from shore into the water body outfall. And so it was interesting to them. That was certainly on their radar. So I don't know what the timing is going to be, whether they're going to, you know, put our project before the main project or not. And then as far as the labeling of fish, they had just come back from a seafood conference in Spain where they had talked about, I think there are some EU regulations coming down as well around labeling of the energy costs and some of the other environmental factors. So they had talked about doing that, but I think their distributors would be the ones to do that, and they would, you know, provide the information.
Okay. And since you opened the door and people are going to ask, I'm going to ask our planning building director, what has been because I thought Nordic had an office here for a while, didn't they? Didn't they have a ribbon cutting for an office also? Down on 3rd Street? Was that right? Just guessing here.
Through the chair.
Director Ford, please.
Thank you. They still do have an office here. They are still proceeding ahead. They still are working on the project. And they are currently working with the Coastal Commission on their permitting, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and also with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they're very actively pursuing their permits right now.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. No other comments from the board?
I did want to
Please.
come back around to something that Supervisor Wilson said about energy. And yes, this is a very energy intensive facility. And I think it, they are growing a fish there for a specific market that is frankly highly lucrative. Kingfish and, you know, the sushi market is a very lucrative market in fisheries. And, you know, they're growing a fish that is not from the North Atlantic. And, you know, so it's a completely, I would say it's a completely artificial environment. It's very, very different from other forms of aquaculture where they're growing a fish that grows there, but in pens, and introducing some of those water quality issues, but then with a lower energy footprint. So there's certainly those trade-offs, and we talked a little bit about that, about how there's more of a tradition of having these, you know, very low energy, facilities, but that do have these water quality impacts. And what they're doing is essentially completely different from what people are used to in the aquaculture realm. People are used to seeing fish grown in hatcheries, but not necessarily in this type of environment. And so that is, certainly a consideration is the energy. And we just didn't get into the brass tacks about what the energy bills were and the elements, but they were able to procure 100% renewable energy from their public power company. So that's one thing. And they also expressed interest in the addition. The wind energy element was really interesting because there are turbines everywhere, but they're not that close together. I mean, there are some installations of multiple turbines, both offshore and onshore there, but a lot of them were more spaced out, which was intriguing to me because I don't really understand the transmission infrastructure and the storage infrastructure that involves. But there's like one wind turbine, every, 5 miles. It's like they're everywhere, but they're isolated mostly. And so the ones that you saw in the pictures of the facility were publicly owned wind turbines, but apparently companies can help invest in some of the process of getting one, and then essentially ensure that some of their energy production is local and from that particular turbine. So they were exploring investing in that particular form of energy production, but the process to actually add additional turbines is quite lengthy and there's a lot of permitting involved. So I thought that was interesting that they're trying to and willing to invest in additional wind energy production, that in part would be dedicated to their facility. And I will also add a disclaimer that was my understanding of it. And there was a little bit, everyone's English was phenomenal, but there was a little bit lost in translation. So if I get any of the facts wrong, please take it with a grain of salt. I'm providing the information to the best of my understanding.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll go to the public, and we'll go to Zoom first, and we have one hand up, 7718. This is your chance to talk on this item. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate going over there and getting some information. I was strongly in favor of this project and was hoping to see it come to fruition. But I know they may be proceeding with some permission things. But it's close to 3 strikes against this project. One of the biggest strikes is it's in the United States and it's in California. This process, and the process is so expensive here compared to third world countries, I can't see how this will come to fruition now. Everybody I talk to on the international basis, if they're honest, are saying we're heading toward an international recession. Even the very well-funded companies like Nordic are pulling back at this time and moving really slow on things. My understanding is their main facility is no longer moving forward. I could be corrected if I'm wrong about that. Maybe John Ford knows more about that than I do. But my understanding was they had an easement in the wrong location and are not able to move forward. So I really wish that we as local people would do more with our own fishery and try and revive that and put some money into that and convince your people with the California government to go ahead and I'm not really in favor of the hatcheries as much as the boxes they put into different things where they move the eggs in different areas and they actually hatch in those areas. I think if we really work on revitalizing, removing dams, revitalizing our fishery, we would have a lot better product and we could feed a lot more people and we would have just about 0 carbon imprint. The energy use on these facilities is just through the roof. So I'm sorry to have to be negative on this one, but I cannot see us moving forward. Along with, it's been mentioned, the new Fish and Wildlife is not going to allow them to have Atlantic salmon, so they're always looking for other species here, and of course, then you have to find the market for it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic.
Thank you, Speaker. Seeing no other hands up in Zoom, we'll go to those here in the audience today that might like to come up and speak on this particular item. Please step forward. This is your chance. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll bring it back to the board. Any final discussion or a motion?
I'll move that we accept this report.
Second.
Moved by Supervisor Wilson and seconded by Supervisor Bushnell to receive the report. And I believe we're still doing a roll call? Okay. And vote tabs are up. Everybody got them?
Okay, great. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. All right.